So picture this. I want you to really put yourself in this highly specific scenario.
Okay, lay it on me.
It is the year 1410. You are an Icelandic sailor, right? And you have just spent, I don't know, the better part of a month just getting absolutely battered by the North Atlantic Ocean.
Which is terrifying even today, let alone in a wooden medieval boat.
Exactly, just freezing, miserable swells.
Yeah.
But you are heading to the western coast of Greenland, to this sprawling, super well-established Norse settlement. Your extended family lives there.
Right, this isn't an outpost, this is a real community.
Yeah, totally. So you navigate into the fjord, and the air is just biting cold, the water is choked with all this seasonal ice. But you look up, and the landmarks are all exactly where they should be.
You see the farms, the pastures.
Yeah, you pull up to the shore, you walk up the incline, and you see the stone walls of Havalsi Church, just standing there, totally resolute against the horizon. The farmhouses are all clustered around the grazing lands, exactly like they always are.
Architecturally speaking, it looks exactly like a perfectly functioning medieval Norse settlement.
Right. But, and this is where it's incredibly eerie, as you walk up that hill, the psychological reality just kind of hits you. Because there is absolute deafening silence.
Just nothing.
Nothing. No cows bleating, no sheep, no smoke coming from any of the hearths. You don't smell roasting meat or burning peat. It's just dead quiet.
And you walk into the houses, and what do you see?
Well, that's the thing. You don't see anything crazy. There were no signs of a raid, no burned timber, no arrows stuck in the walls, no scattered weapons.
No mass graves hastily dug in the frozen dirt.
Exactly. No bodies, no notes left behind, just empty houses.
Yeah.
So you wander around these silent pastures, and eventually you just pull out your parchment. You write down the last bit of local news you heard from a year or two ago, that there was a wedding in that church.
Right, the 1408 wedding.
Yeah. And you write down a piece of local gossip that some guy was recently burned at the stake for witchcraft. And then you just get back on your ship and you sail away.
Leaving it all behind.
Yeah. And that totally mundane piece of parchment, that becomes the absolute final historical record of a 400-year-old civilization.
It's honestly one of the most baffling archaeological anomalies in human history.
It really is.
Because look, when a civilization of that scale falls, history usually gives us a really loud, really chaotic final act, you know?
Right, it's messy.
Extremely messy. We find the plague pits, we dig up the physical devastation of a siege, or we find like archives full of desperate letters begging neighboring kingdoms for military aid or grain shipments.
Yeah, collapse is noisy.
It's incredibly noisy. But in those Greenland fjords, there is only this jarring, totally unresolved silence.
And unraveling that silence is our mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at the completely baffling disappearance of the Greenland Norse.
It's a literal cold case.
A very literal cold case. It went totally dark in the early 15th century. And to figure this out, we're pulling from a really diverse stack of sources today. We've got the foundational Icelandic sagas, obviously.
But more importantly, we have the modern science.
Yes. The recent climate data from university teams looking at lake sediment cores, and these cutting-edge bioarchaeological studies, which are wild, by the way, looking at the chemical isotopes inside the skeletons of the Greenlanders themselves.
And the goal here, for everyone listening, is to basically dismantle that very tidy, very simplified narrative most of us got in, like, middle school history class.
Oh, the stubborn Viking myth.
Right. So this idea that it was a moral failing, that these were just arrogant Europeans who refused to adapt to a changing climate and just froze to death out of pure stubbornness.
Which is just, it's so wrong. The reality we found in the data is 1,000,000 times more terrifying.
It really is. We are looking at a multi-layered systems collapse.
A perfect storm.
Exactly. A perfect storm that managed to erase thousands of highly adaptable people and leave almost zero physical trace of the actual end.
Okay, so to understand how they vanished, we really need to establish what they were actually doing there in the first place.
Right, the origin story.
Yeah, and it requires a bit of parsing.
Yeah.
We're jumping back to 985 AD, and most of you probably know the basic lore, Eric the Red.
A man with some very serious anger management issues.
That is an understatement. The guy had a massive propensity for retaliatory violence. He gets exiled from Norway for manslaughter, moves to Iceland, kills somebody else over a land dispute.
As you do.
Right, totally normal Tuesday. And he gets exiled again for another 3 years. So at this point, he's basically out of map.
He has nowhere else to go.
Nowhere. So he sails west into uncharted waters, finds land, and then executes what is basically history's first great real estate scam.
The fire festival of the 10th century.
Exactly.
Right.
He finds this ice-covered rock and names it Greenland. specifically to trick people into moving there.
And the Icelandic sagas actually heavily emphasize this public relations aspect. They explicitly say he knew a pleasant name would attract settlers better than the harsh reality.
Which is just brilliant marketing.
Yeah.
Shady, but brilliant.
Right. And obviously the sagas were written centuries later, so they have some narrative embellishments. But the physical footprint validates the timeline. Eric knew he couldn't rule an empty landscape.
He needed human capital.
Exactly. He needed a critical mass of people to establish a functioning chieftaincy.
See, I've always found that framing a bit simplistic, though. Like, you don't convince thousands of experienced maritime farmers to pack up their families, their cows, their sheep, onto open-decked longships for a totally lethal ocean crossing just because the brochure said the grass was green.
Right, they weren't stupid.
Exactly. There had to be a tangible, highly motivating factor. Because once they got there, they realized the habitable land was just these two primary strips of deep fjords.
Yeah.
The eastern settlement and the western settlement.
And a smaller middle settlement we found later.
Yeah. So how do you rationalize staying? You cannot build a multi-thousand person civilization on the edge of the Arctic Circle through subsistence dairy farming.
You're absolutely right. They didn't just scrape by on milk and cheese. The entire civilization was subsidized by this highly specialized, incredibly lucrative export economy.
They were basically a resource extraction colony.
The medieval equivalent of one, yes, living in an extreme environment. The Norse were heavily integrated into the luxury markets of Europe.
Okay, let's talk about the Nordorsetta, the northern hunting grounds. Because the sources go into crazy detail about these massive, super dangerous annual expeditions.
Hundreds of miles north of their settlements.
Into the actual ice pack. They were hunting polar bears for pelts, sure. But the absolute backbone of their economy, the thing that let them buy iron, timber, stained glass for their churches, was walrus ivory and narwhal tusks.
And the economics of this are just fascinating if you look at the geopolitics of the 11th and 12th centuries.
Because of the Crusades, right?
Yes. So at this time, the traditional supply lines for African elephant ivory into northern Europe were completely disrupted. The Islamic empires controlled those routes, and the Crusades created massive trade embargoes.
So you literally couldn't get elephant ivory in Europe.
It was incredibly scarce. So the Greenlanders essentially possessed a total monopoly on the only viable alternative.
Walrus ivory.
Precisely. It became the premier material for luxury goods in the church. Crucifixes, reliquaries, those high-end chess sets.
Like the Lewis chessmen.
Exactly. And the narwhal tusks were even more valuable, but for a totally different, kind of hilarious reason.
Oh man, this is where medieval biology meets high-end fraud.
Yes, it is.
They were selling these narwhal tusks to European royalty and telling them they were unicorn horns.
And the royals fully believed it. In the medieval mind, the unicorn horn wasn't just pretty to look at. The humoral theory of medicine at the time said an alicorn could neutralize poisons.
Which, if you're a paranoid king...
Or a wealthy bishop terrified of assassination, a material that could purify your wine was literally priceless. They paid fortunes for these spiraled tusks.
I just want to pause on the economic architecture of this for a second because it just seems profoundly fragile.
Oh, it was a house of cards.
Right. You have a community of maybe 3,000 to 5,000 people living at the absolute edge of the known world. And during their really short, super critical summer months, the exact time they should be harvesting hay to keep their cows alive through the winter, they're rowing hundreds of miles north into iceberg-filled waters.
To hunt walruses.
Yes. And then they have to rely on merchants crossing the treacherous North Atlantic just to trade that ivory for the basic building blocks of survival.
Iron for tools, timber to fix their roofs.
It's the definition of a precarious economy. They built an entire society on a single luxury export, shipped across a perilous supply chain to a market they had zero control over.
But for a while it worked. I mean, they were wealthy enough to petition Rome for their own resident bishop.
They built a massive cathedral at Guerrero.
Yeah, paying their tithes to the Vatican in walrus tusks and polar bear skins. But like you said, their prosperity was totally tethered to the shifting tastes of the European mainland.
Which brings us to the environmental reality they were living in. And this is where we have to talk about the foundational myth of the Greenland collapse.
The stubborn Viking myth.
Yes. The story basically everyone learns in school. The idea is that they arrived during the medieval warm period, set up their cute European-style dairy farms, and then the climate shifted. The little ice age hit.
Temperatures dropped.
Right. And the textbook narrative says that instead of adapting, instead of, learning from the Thule Inuit who were migrating down the coast, The Norse just stubbornly insisted on raising cows in the snow.
Clinging to their European identity.
Yeah, until they just froze and starved.
And that narrative has dominated history for decades because, honestly, it's a very neat morality play.
It punishes cultural hubris.
Exactly. It suggests that a failure to integrate is what doomed them. But modern bioarchaeology and paleoclimatology just completely obliterate that theory.
Okay, let's look at the climate data first, because the methodology here is so cool. If you just look at a massive ice core drilled from the center of the Greenland ice sheet, you get this really broad macroscopic view.
It tells you the little ice age happened, sure.
But it doesn't tell you what the weather was actually like in the specific valleys where the Norse were trying to grow hay. So researchers from the University of Massachusetts went and took a different approach.
The lake sediment cores.
Yeah, they went to the lakes directly adjacent to the ruins of the Norse farms and pulled up these sediment cores from the bottom of the lakes.
Which is incredible because lake sediment cores give you a high-resolution, super localized environmental history. It's essentially reading a chronological diary of the dirt.
Yeah, they analyzed like bug parks, right?
Chironomid head capsules, yes. Remains of midges, which are highly sensitive to summer temperature changes. And they look at lipid biomarkers, specific pollen types.
And what they found completely changes how we view the crisis. Yes, it was getting colder, but the acute stressor that actually broke their farming system wasn't just the cold.
It was a prolonged, severe drought.
Which sounds so counterintuitive. When we think of an ice age, we picture blizzards, just endless snow.
But from a meteorological standpoint, cold air holds significantly less water vapor than warm air. So as the regional temperatures dropped, the precipitation just plummeted.
So they were sitting there, surrounded by glaciers and fjords, but the actual soil they need for their cows is just completely parched.
It was a slow-moving agricultural disaster. Because the Norse farming model required them to harvest enough hay during the summer to keep the animals alive indoors during the dark winter.
And the drought meant the grass just didn't grow.
It didn't grow tall enough to cut. Then the wind comes in and erodes the dry topsoil.
So they're fighting desertification in the Arctic.
Exactly. The archaeology shows that as the centuries went on, the Norse had to move their livestock to higher and higher elevations in the summer, literally grazing them right up to the edges of the melting glaciers just to find grass.
So they weren't just sitting by the fire being stubborn, they were actively fighting to survive. But the most compelling evidence against the whole stubborn Viking myth comes to the bones.
The isotope analysis? This is where the rigidity narrative completely falls apart.
Danish and Canadian research teams looked at the chemical makeup, the bone collagen of skeletons from Norse churchyards all across Greenland.
Spanning from the very first settlers all the way to the final burials in the 1400s.
And let's break down how this works, because the whole "you are what you eat" thing is incredibly literal here. We're talking about carbon-13 and nitrogen-15 isotopes.
Right, so as you consume protein, the specific isotopic signatures of that food get incorporated into your tissues, your bone collagen specifically. And nitrogen-15 is super useful because of a process called trophic bioaccumulation.
Meaning, the higher up the food chain an animal is, the more nitrogen-15 is in its system.
Exactly. Terrestrial food webs like cows eating grass are short, so a farmer eating beef and dairy has low nitrogen-15, but marine food webs are very long. Plankton to small fish to big fish to apex predators.
Like seals.
Yes. With every step up that ladder, the nitrogen-15 concentrates. So if a human is eating a lot of apex marine predators, their bones will show massive spikes in nitrogen-15.
Okay, so when researchers looked at the earliest settlers, the guys who came over with Eric the Red, their signature was about 40% marine, 60% terrestrial.
Which makes sense, farmers supplementing with some fish.
Totally. But what happens as we move through the centuries? As the drought gets worse and the pastures fail?
The ratio totally inverts. By the late 13th and 14th centuries, the average Greenlander's diet was up to 80% marine protein.
80%?
Yes. And based on the garbage middens we've excavated, we know they weren't just eating cod, they were eating seal, mostly harp seals and ringed seals.
That is just a monumental shift. They basically abandoned their core cultural identity as European dairy farmers and transformed into highly specialized marine hunters.
To get 80% of your calories from seals, you have to fundamentally restructure your entire labor force, your calendars, your hunting tech.
You can't just stumble into that. They adapted brilliantly.
They executed a near-total economic and dietary pivot to survive. They did everything modern survival theory says they should have done.
But, and this is the haunting question of this entire deep dive, if they weren't too stubborn, and they successfully pivoted to eating seals. Why are we walking through silent, empty ruins in 1410?
Right.
If the climate didn't kill them through sheer freezing, what did?
Well, the answer is that individual adaptability cannot always overcome macrosystemic failure. The Greenland Norse got hit by a confluence of compounding crises. We call them the four horsemen of the Greenland collapse.
Okay, let's go through them. The first shock, the market crash.
The bursting of the walrus ivory bubble. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the map of Europe is shifting. The Crusader states fall, trade routes to Africa open up again.
And suddenly, huge shipments of African elephant ivory flood into Europe,
rendering walrus ivory practically worthless.
And we have to talk about the physical difference here, because from an artisan's perspective, elephant ivory is just vastly superior, right?
Completely different material. A walrus tusk is small, and it has this core of secondary dentin. It looks kind of marbled, almost like tapioca.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, and it's granular. It fractures really easily if you try to carve it deeply. But elephant ivory is massive, consistent, and smooth all the way through.
Which is huge because of the shifting aesthetics in Europe. The Gothic period is starting. They want to carve these big, sweeping, elegant, curved statues of the Virgin Mary.
And you physically cannot do that with a brittle, marbled walrus tusk.
So demand plummets. The European elite just don't want an inferior product anymore. So the one currency Greenland has to buy iron and timber just bottoms out.
Which leads directly into the second systemic shock, the catastrophic severing of their supply chain. Because right as their ivory loses value, Europe gets hit by the Black Death.
Mid-14th century. Just devastating.
The bubonic plague wiped out huge swaths of Norway, and Norway was Greenland's legally mandated trading partner. The Norwegian crown had a strict monopoly on trade with Greenland, using these specialized cargo ships called nars.
But the plague kills the merchants. It kills the sailors who actually know how to navigate the crazy ice-choked waters to get to Greenland.
Exactly. The institutional navigational knowledge just died.
And then you have the Hanseatic League stepping in. Because Norway is weak post-plague, these North German merchant guilds essentially take over the port of Bergen.
Which was the departure point for Greenland.
Right, and these Hanseatic guys are purely business. They have zero interest in outfitting incredibly dangerous, super low-profit expeditions to the edge of the world just to trade for cheap walrus ivory.
The math didn't work for them. Why risk a ship in the Arctic when you can trade safely in the Baltic for timber and furs? So, the ships simply stopped coming.
And we really need to stress why isolation was literally a death sentence for them. It wasn't just like, oh no, we can't get fancy wine anymore. Greenland has no tall, straight timber.
Just small scrub birch and willow?
Right. Nothing you can mill into planks to build an ocean-going vessel.
Yeah.
So without Norwegian ships, they're physically trapped. They can't build an evacuation fleet. And worse, they have no indigenous source of smeltable iron.
Without iron, a medieval society just grinds to a halt.
You can't fix your sides to cut the hay.
You can't make weapons. You can't even fix the rivets on your small fishing boats. It is complete technological regression.
Okay, so they're trapped, their economy is dead, their tools are rusting.
Which brings us to the third shock, the physical loss of their land.
This one is fascinating. It blew my mind. A study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences looked at the geological impacts of the Little Ice Age. And it wasn't just glaciers advancing down the mountains. The actual coastal land was sinking.
It's a process called isostatic depression. The Greenland ice sheet is unfathomably heavy. As the climate cooled, the ice expanded and thickened. And the sheer gravitational mass of all that new ice literally pushed the Earth's crust down.
Like putting a bowling ball on a mattress. The mattress sags around the weight.
That is the exact mechanical principle. It pushes the crust down into the asthenosphere. So even though global sea levels were dropping slightly because water was freezing into ice, the local sea level in Greenland was rising extremely fast because the land itself was sinking.
They calculated it rose nearly 10 feet over the lifespan of the colony.
10 feet is catastrophic.
Because the only flat grazing land they had was right on the edge of the fjords.
They were caught in an impossible vice. Glaciers advancing from behind, pushing them to the coast, and the sinking crust bringing the saltwater inland.
And saltwater kills the soil. It ruins the root systems of the European grasses. They were literally watching their farms disappear under freezing water.
Which brings us to the fourth factor, their neighbors.
Right. So while all this is happening, the Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit, are migrating down from the Canadian high Arctic.
Moving south along the Greenland coast.
And older history books always love to say the Norse were wiped out in some massive violent war with the Inuit.
That mostly comes from a 14th century account by a priest named Ivar Bardarson. He went to the Western settlement, found it totally empty with just feral cattle wandering around, and he explicitly blamed the indigenous populations.
He called them Skraelings, right? A derogatory term.
Yes, he claimed they destroyed the settlement. But the archaeological record just does not support that at all.
If there was a genocidal war, we'd find mass graves with weapon trauma.
We'd find ash layers from burned longhouses, a massive exchange of weaponry. We don't find any of that.
So what actually happened between them?
The consensus now is that there was probably some localized friction, maybe skirmishes over hunting grounds up north, but no coordinated war of annihilation. They operated on fundamentally different ecological paradigms.
The Inuit had way better tech for that environment.
Toggling harpoons, large skin boats, kayaks, dog sleds. They could exploit the marine environment way better than the Norse, so they largely inhabited different niches. There may have been resource competition, but the Inuit didn't militarily conquer the Norse.
It's just so much more sobering than a big battle. It wasn't an asteroid. It wasn't a war. Their market vanished. A pandemic killed their supply chain. The soil dried up, and the ocean swallowed their pastures.
A true systemic collapse.
Which brings us back to the end, the final records from those Icelandic sailors who got blown off course between 1406 and 1410.
Those records give us an incredible psychological window into a society in the twilight of its existence.
Okay, we have to talk about the 1407 witchcraft trial. A man named Colgrim was burned at the stake for using black magic to seduce a married woman, the daughter of the local law speaker, actually.
Yes.
And when I read this, I thought it was completely absurd. You were living on the edge of a frozen abyss. No ship has come in years. No iron. You're eating seal meat to survive. Why on earth are you spending precious calories organizing a formal legal trial to execute a guy for magic?
Because when the external environment becomes completely uncontrollable, human societies tend to double down on internal ideological structures.
To prevent chaos.
Exactly. It's a defense mechanism against the breakdown of social norms. Burning Holgrim wasn't a breakdown of order, it was a desperate assertion of it.
They were enforcing the Gragas, the Icelandic law code.
Yeah. Holding a trial, hearing testimony, executing a citizen that requires a functioning hierarchy, they were sending a message to themselves. The ice is coming, the ships are gone, but we are still civilized Christian Europeans. The rules still apply.
It's an incredible display of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And then the very next year, 1408, they hold a wedding at Halsey Church.
A celebration of continuity, believing in a future, even when there really isn't one.
But then, 1410, the sailors leave, and the written history just stops.
Archaeology tells us the collapse was staggered. The Western settlement fell first, probably mid-1300s because it was further north and more exposed. But the Eastern settlement held on.
Radiocarbon dating shows they might have lasted until maybe 1450 or 1460.
Which means there was a final generation.
A group of people who lived for 40 or 50 years after the last European ship left, just scanning the horizon for 5 decades.
Yeah.
So, what's the working theory on how that final generation actually died?
There are 3 main hypotheses, and the truth is probably a mix of all 3. The first is just simple, agonizing starvation.
The grim biological reality.
Right. The isotope data shows they relied on communal seal hunts. But those hunts require a critical mass of healthy laborers. You need people to row, people to process meat, people to fix the boats.
So as the population dwindles from malnutrition or disease,
you hit a tipping point. You no longer have enough people to hunt enough food to feed the people you have left. It's a fatal negative feedback loop.
is there evidence for that?
Sadly, yes. In the Western settlement ruins, excavators found the bones of hunting dogs with cut marks on them. They were eating their own working animals.
Oh man.
They also found carrion fly pupa inside the houses, which suggests that in the final days, bodies were just left unburied inside the homes, probably because the survivors were too weak to dig graves in the permafrost.
That is deeply unsettling.
Okay.
What about the second theory? A final exodus. Did they try to escape?
Well, they didn't have timber for big gnars, but they were master coastal navigators. It's plausible that families cobbled together driftwood and seal skins to fix up small coastal boats and tried to cross the Davis Strait or the Atlantic.
But doing that in a patched-up skiff is a suicide mission.
For most, yes. We'll never find the archaeology of boats that sank in the open ocean, but maybe a few made it to Iceland or North America and just quietly assimilated.
Which brings up the third theory, the most fascinating one to me. Assimilation with the Inuit. You're the last 50 starving Europeans. You see the Inuit thriving. Do you finally break the cultural taboo and join them?
From a survival standpoint, it's the only logical choice. The Inuit had the exact knowledge needed to live there, but the evidence for widespread assimilation is incredibly sparse.
Why wouldn't they? Was it just arrogance?
It's deeper than that. It's about worldview. To join the Inuit meant abandoning their Christian faith, their diet, their clothing, everything that made them human in their own eyes. And from the Inuit side, why would a mobile hunting band take on the burden of feeding starving foreigners who don't even know how to use a kayak?
Right. You'd just be dead weight. And genetically, we don't see evidence of a mass absorption, right?
We don't. There's minor European genetic markers in modern Inuit populations there, but nothing indicating mass integration in the 1400s. Though if it was only a handful of survivors, their genetic footprint might just be too small to detect now.
So the silence leaves room for all three. Starvation, drowning, or maybe a tiny few starting a new life. It's a historical ghost story, but way more profound than the myth. They weren't stubborn, they were adaptable. They changed their diet to 80% seal. They survived in an extreme environment for 4 centuries.
They lasted longer in Greenland than the United States has existed as a nation. We have to grant them their agency.
Yeah, but their resilience just wasn't enough to overcome the fragility of their systems. And honestly, synthesizing all this, the isotopes, the lake mud, the Hanseatic League, it leaves me with a really unsettling thought about us today.
Because we assume that innovation and grit will always save us.
Exactly. We think if we're smart enough, we can survive anything. But if a society can completely change its food source, survive for centuries, and still vanish because the ivory market shifted and a pandemic ruined a supply chain across the ocean, what does that say about our modern world?
It challenges our hubris. We are infinitely more reliant on fragile, complex supply chains than the Norse ever were.
We rely on systems we have absolutely zero local control over.
And the Ghost of Greenland reminds us that when macro systems fail, the peripheries get cut off first. An individual grit can't fix a broken global supply line.
It really can't.
Yeah.
So, just think about that Icelandic sailor pulling away from the coast in 1410.
Yeah.
Think about what went through the mind of the very last Greenlander, just sitting in the shadow of that stone church, staring at a freezing ocean, waiting for a ship that was never going to come. Okay, friends, I want you to just take a second and imagine something for me. Like, really picture this in your head.
Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, try to really put yourselves in the scene.
Right, so you're not listening to us right now on your commute or doing the dishes or whatever. You are actually an Arab merchant.
A very wealthy, educated merchant.
Exactly. And the year is 922. We're going back over 1,000 years. And you have traveled thousands of miles away from your home in Baghdad.
Which, we should remember, Baghdad was like the center of the civilized world back then.
Oh, totally. It was this massive, sophisticated metropolis. You've got libraries, public baths, scholars everywhere. It's the absolute peak of luxury and knowledge.
And now you are very, very far from that.
Right. Instead of a warm bathhouse, you are standing on the muddy, freezing banks of the Volga River. You're shivering. You can see your breath in the air. You're literally at the edge of the known world on this diplomatic mission.
Probably questioning all your life choices at that exact moment.
Oh, 100%. But then it gets crazier because out of nowhere, you encounter this group of strangers. And honestly, friends, if it were me, I think my jaw would just hit the mud.
I mean, anybody would be terrified. These guys were they were something else entirely.
Right. Like, they are massive, these towering giant people, pale skin, blonde hair, and they are completely covered in tattoos.
From their fingertips all the way up to their necks. Dark green, maybe dark blue ink.
Yeah, like trees and weird symbols. And the scariest part, they are armed to the teeth at all times. They've got these huge axes, long swords, daggers.
They never put them down, not even to eat.
Literally never. Like, they go into the bushes to do their business and they take a giant battle axe with them. So you're standing there freezing looking at these tattooed giants and you ask a local guide, like, who are these guys?
And the local tells you, oh, those are the Rus.
The Rus, which, friends, if we translate that into modern historical terms, that Arab merchant was staring face to face with Vikings.
Yes, exact same people.
Which is just wild to me. These are the exact same people we see in all those movies and TV shows, right? The guys with the long ships raiding monasteries in England and burning down parts of France.
The exact same cultural group, the exact same bloodline.
But they are standing just a few thousand kilometers away from the center of the Islamic world. Like, they're nowhere near the icy fjords of Scandinavia.
Which brings us to the whole mission of our deep dive today, friends.
Yes, exactly. We are going into the epic and honestly kind of forgotten story of the Eastern Vikings,
Sometimes called the Varangians or the Rus.
because pop culture is just obsessed with the Vikings going west, right?
Right.
Going to Britain, going to Paris. But we are going to completely shatter that Western-centric image today.
We really are, because while some of them were doing hit-and-run raids on the western coasts, a massive, highly organized faction went east.
And it makes no sense geographically. I mean, I was thinking about this in Friends. It's like finding out a notorious local street gang from your neighborhood is actually running a massive, sophisticated, multinational corporation on the other side of the planet.
That is actually a very accurate analogy,
Yeah.
because they didn't just wander over there, they traveled down these incredibly complex river systems of Russia.
All the way to the Caspian Sea.
Right, and to Constantinople and right up to the edges of the Abbasid Empire.
So how does a bunch of guys from the frozen north end up running a corporate empire in the Middle East?
Well, to understand that, we have to rewind a bit. We need to go back to the mid-9th century.
Oh, right, the 860s.
Exactly, and we need to talk about a man named Rurik.
Okay, friends, so here is the story. According to the ancient Russian texts, right? The primary chronicle.
Which is our main written source for this early period.
Yeah, and it says that in this vast territory that is now Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, there were all these Slavic tribes just living in the forests, scattered around.
But they were constantly fighting each other.
Oh, nonstop. Just endless squabbling over land, resources, whatever. Total chaos.
Yeah.
So allegedly, the leaders of these Slavic tribes get together and they're like, look, we are going to destroy ourselves if we keep this up.
We need order.
Right. So they supposedly send an invitation, an actual invitation up north to the Baltic Sea to the Norsemen.
The Viking.
Yeah, and they're like, hey, our land is great and really rich, but we have no order. Please come and be our kings and rule over us.
Which you have to admit sounds a little too convenient.
Right. Friends, think about that. Did they really send a polite RSVP card saying, please come tax us and be our overlords?
It's highly unlikely. We have to look at these chronicles with a very critical eye.
Because they were written centuries later. Right?
Exactly. They were written by monks who worked for the descendants of these Vikings.
Yeah.
So, just like the saga of Eric the Red, it's full of political spin.
Yeah, it's totally rebranded. It's like a hostile corporate takeover that history just decided to call a peaceful merger.
That's exactly what it was. But the core narrative, the fact that Norsemen came down and established a massive power base in Eastern Europe, that part is absolutely true.
Right, because we have the archaeological evidence to back it up.
Oh, tons of it. Burials, weapons, settlements. Rurik came down, set up his base in Staraya Ladoga.
And then moved to Novgorod.
Right. And then his successor, Oleg, took things even further. He pushed south, conquered the city of Kiev in 882, and established this massive, sprawling state.
The Kievan Rus.
Yes. The foundation of modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus.
And this is where my mind just gets blown, right?
Yeah.
Because there's this massive psychological shift that happens here for the Vikings.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about the guys who went west. They were smash and grab robbers. They show up, burn a church, steal the gold cups, and run away.
True.
But the guys who went east, they became state builders. They became administrators. They had to figure out how to rule over millions of Slavic people.
That's a huge point. They shifted from pirates to politicians.
Which is way harder. You can't just swing an axe to build a tax system.
Actually, in the beginning, their tax system did involve a lot of axes.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it was a system called polyuti. Every winter, when the rivers froze, the Rus princes would travel around to the Slavic tribes with their heavily armed war bands.
Oh, so it was basically a mafia protection racket.
Pretty much. They demanded tribute. Furs, honey, wax, and very crucially, slaves.
Wow. Okay, then we definitely need to get into that. Because establishing this state, the Kievan Rus, it wasn't just about owning some forests.
Not at all. It was a strategic masterstroke.
Right, because Kiev sits right on the best river systems. By taking Kiev, they basically unlock the most lucrative medieval highway system in the entire world.
2 gargantuan trade routes, to be exact.
Friends, imagine a map right now. Route number 1 is called the Varangian to the Greeks.
Right, going straight down the Dnieper River.
Yeah, you take your Viking ship, you go down the Dnieper, you pop out into the Black Sea, and you sail right up to the glittering, massive walls of Constantinople.
The capital of the Byzantine Empire, the richest city in Europe.
Exactly. But it wasn't just a smooth sailing trip, was it?
Far from it. The Dnieper River had these massive, dangerous rapids. The ships couldn't get through the water there.
So what did they do? Just turn around?
No, they would actually take the ships out of the water. They'd use wooden logs as rollers and manually drag these massive Viking ships over the land to bypass the rapids.
That is insane. Dragging a ship over land.
And while they were doing it, they were constantly being ambushed by nomadic tribes who wanted to steal their goods.
So you're dragging a boat through the mud while dodging arrows. I mean, the profit margins must have been astronomical for them to endure that.
Oh, they were. And that was just the first route.
Right. Route 2 went down the Volga River.
Exactly. All the way down to the Caspian Sea. Here, they didn't deal with the Byzantines. They traded with the Bulgars and the Khazars.
Who basically acted as the middlemen, right?
Yes, the Khazars and Bulgars would take the goods across the sea or over land on camel caravans directly to the Abbasid Empire, to Baghdad.
Okay, so we've got these northern warriors tapping into the wealth of the Islamic world. What on earth were they selling to get so rich?
Well, the natural resources of the north were highly prized. Luxurious furs like sable and marten, which the wealthy elites in the desert loved.
Got to show off that wealth with a heavy fur coat in the desert.
Exactly. Also honey, beeswax for candles, and walrus ivory, which was great for carving.
But there was another commodity, wasn't there? The dark side of this whole economy.
Yes, human slaves.
Friends, we can't gloss over this. The slave trade was a massive foundational pillar of the Russian economy.
It really was. As we mentioned with that winter tribute system, they would capture locals, Slavs, Finno-Ugric peoples, and march them south.
Just chaining them up and forcing them down these rivers to be sold in the markets of Constantinople and the Islamic world. It's horrific.
It is a very dark reality of the medieval world, and it was incredibly lucrative.
So they sell the furs, they sell the slaves. What are they getting in return? Are they taking back, like silk and spices?
They did take some of that, sure, but what they really wanted, above all else, was silver.
Silver coins.
Specifically, Islamic silver dirhams, minted in Baghdad and other major Islamic cities.
And this is where the physical proof comes in, friends. The sheer scale of this globalization is just staggering.
We aren't just guessing about this trade. We have the receipts.
Literally buried in the ground. Tell them about the coins.
All right, so archaeologists have discovered tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of these Islamic silver dirhams buried across Scandinavia.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yes. Just on the Swedish island of Gotland alone, they've found massive hoards of these coins buried by Norse farmers and traders.
Friends, I want you to really grasp how wild this is. It is literally like digging up your backyard in, I don't know, rural Ohio and finding a chest full of ancient Aztec gold.
It's a great way to put it.
It makes no sense until you understand this massive trade network. You have coins stamped with Arabic script, minted to the sound of Islamic prayers in Baghdad, ending up buried under the snow in Sweden.
And the Vikings didn't even care about the Arabic writing on the coins.
You couldn't read it anyway, right?
Exactly. They only cared about the weight and the purity of the silver. Sometimes they would just chop the coins into pieces with an axe to make smaller change.
Hack silver, just brutally efficient. But think about the economic impact of that, friends.
It was transformative.
Right, because suddenly you have this massive influx of Middle Eastern silver flooding into these small Scandinavian villages. That must have completely upended their local economy.
Oh, absolutely. It changed the entire power structure back in their homelands.
Because whoever controls that silver controls the armies.
Yes. You use that silver to buy better weapons, hire more warriors, bribe your rivals. The wealth coming from the Islamic world basically accelerated the creation of kingdoms back in Scandinavia.
It's just all so connected. But friends, we don't just have to rely on coins buried in the dirt to prove this.
No, we have something much more visceral.
We have a literal eyewitness, someone who stood face to face with them and wrote down exactly what he saw.
Yes. And this brings us back to that Arab merchant we asked you to imagine at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Except he wasn't just a merchant. His name was Ibn Fadlan.
Right, she was a diplomat.
So it's 921, 922. The Abbasid court in Baghdad sends Ibn Fadlan on this grueling mission to the king of the Volga Bulgars.
And it was a rough journey, months of travel.
Yeah, riding across the desert, freezing in the steppes. And along the way, he just happens to run into a camp of these rust traders.
And thankfully for us, Ibn Fadlan was a very meticulous note-taker.
Oh, he wrote down everything. And the culture shock he experienced was just off the charts.
I mean, he describes their physical appearance in great detail. He says they're as tall as palm trees.
The tattoos, the axes, we mentioned that. But then he starts talking about their hygiene, right?
Yes. And he was appalled.
Because remember, he's coming from Baghdad, where cleanliness is tied to religious purity. And he watches these Vikings wash their faces and blow their noses into the exact same bowl of water every morning.
Passing the bowl around the whole camp.
Yeah, he literally calls them the filthiest of God's creatures.
Yeah.
But the most famous entry in his entire journal isn't about their dirty water.
No, it's about their rituals.
Friends, this is where it gets incredibly intense. While Ibn Fadlan is there, one of the Rus chieftains dies.
And Ibn Fadlan gets a front row seat to a Viking ship burial.
And he writes it all down. It is detailed, it is gruesome, and it is fascinating.
It really is one of the most important historical documents we have about Viking culture.
So the chief guys, and they don't just bury him right away, they put him in a temporary grave for 10 days while they make new clothes for him.
And during those 10 days, the rest of the camp is just drinking themselves into a stupor.
Yeah, nonstop partying. Then they haul his massive wooden ship up onto the land, they build a wooden tent on the deck, and they dig him up and put him inside.
Dressed in the finest silk garments, surrounded by weapons and food.
But then the sacrifices start, and this is where it gets really dark. They bring out a dog, cut it in half, throw it in the ship.
They take 2 horses, run them until they're sweating, and then hack them to pieces with swords.
Cows, roosters, all chopped up and thrown in. But the ultimate sacrifice, friends, wasn't an animal.
No, it was a human.
Yeah. They asked the chieftain slaves who would die with him, and one slave girl volunteers.
And we really have to put volunteers in massive air quotes there.
Seriously. The social pressure or outright coercion must have been immense.
Once she says yes, she can't back out.
Ibn Fadlan watches this poor girl go through days of rituals. She's drinking heavily, singing, and on the final day, there's this terrifying figure who orchestrates the whole thing.
An old woman they called the Angel of Death.
Right. She's the one in charge of the killing. The men hold the girl down, and the Angel of Death strangles her with a cord while simultaneously stabbing her in the ribs with a dagger.
And then her body is placed next to her master in the tent.
Finally, the closest relative of the dead chief strips naked, walks backwards to the ship with a torch, and sets the whole thing on fire.
Burning the ship, the chieftain, the slave girl, and all the treasure down to ashes.
It is completely mind-blowing thing to read. It's so cinematic and brutal.
Yeah.
But we need to be careful here, right?
Yes, very careful. We must contextualize this text.
Because it's easy to read that and go, wow, all Vikings were just bloodthirsty monsters.
Exactly. This text is incredibly valuable because it's a primary source written by an outsider with no political skin in the game. He's just reporting what he sees.
Why?
But it is just one man's observation of one specific group of Rus traders at one specific time in history.
Right, you can't just copy-paste this one funeral and say, yep, this represents all Viking culture across hundreds of years.
Exactly. Not every Viking got a ship burial. Not every funeral involved human sacrifice.
Plus, friends, we have to remember Ibn Fadlan's inherent bias. Like we said, he came from the cleanest, most literate city on earth.
So he might be emphasizing the shock value.
Right. I mean, was he objectively describing them, or was he exaggerating their barbarism because he was experiencing extreme culture shock?
It's a valid question. He definitely wanted his readers back in Baghdad to feel a sense of superiority.
Absolutely. But regardless of whether they were seen as dirty barbarians or sophisticated merchants, one thing nobody argued with was their physical prowess.
Oh, their ability to fight was undeniable.
And it was so undeniable, friends, that the most powerful emperor in the Christian world decided he absolutely needed to buy them.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating chapters of this whole story.
Yes. Let's fast forward a bit. We're leaving Ibn Fadlan in 922, and we're jumping to the year 988.
And we are moving from the Volga River down to Constantinople.
The Byzantine Empire.
Right.
And the emperor at the time is Basil II.
And Basil is having a really bad year.
A terrible year. He is facing a massive domestic rebellion. His own generals are rising up against him. His throne is completely on the line.
He can't trust his own military.
Right. Anyone could stab him in the back.
So in total desperation, Basil looks north. He sends a message to Prince Vladimir of Kiev, the ruler of the Kievan Rus.
And he basically says, I need help. Send troops. And Vladimir says, sure, I'll send you my best guys. But the price is going to be incredibly high.
He sends 6,000 elite Rus warriors.
6,000 giant axe-wielding Vikings. But in exchange, Vladimir demands to marry Emperor Basil's sister.
Which was unprecedented.
Yeah.
A Byzantine princess marrying a northern barbarian who had only just recently converted to Christianity.
It shows you how desperate Basil was. He actually agreed to it. And those 6,000 warriors, they sail down to Constantinople and they absolutely crush the rebellion.
They decimated Basil's enemies.
And Basil is so impressed by their ferocity, and more importantly by the fact that they don't care about local Byzantine politics.
Right, they can't be bribed by rival generals because they don't even speak the language.
Exactly, they only care about the guy paying them. So Basil formalizes this group. He turns them into the Varangian Guard.
The elite, fiercely loyal, terrifying personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors.
For centuries, just these massive Norsemen with their huge two-handed axes standing next to the emperor in his silk robes. It's such a striking image.
And it became a massive draw for young men back in Scandinavia. Going to serve in the Varangian Guard was seen as the ultimate path to wealth and glory.
Which perfectly sets up the ultimate example of this Eastern Viking lifestyle. Friends, we have to talk about Harald Hardrada.
Oh, yes. You cannot talk about the Eastern Vikings without talking about Harald Hardrada.
The guy's life is like an action movie turned up to 11.
It really is.
Okay, so Harald starts out in Norway. He has to flee a civil war when he's just 15 years old.
Barely a teenager, on the run for his life.
Right. So he goes east. He ends up in the court of the Kievan, spends some time there. Then he travels further south to Constantinople.
And he joins the Varangian Guard.
He doesn't just join it, he becomes the commander of it. He leads Byzantine armies into battle in Sicily and Bulgaria, fighting pirates in the Mediterranean.
He accumulates just an obscene amount of wealth.
And military experience, like he's learning siege tactics, he's seeing the world. Then eventually he decides he wants to go home.
But the Empress won't let him leave.
Right. So what does he do? He literally breaks out of prison, steals a couple of ships, and sails back up the river systems to Kiev to pick up all his treasures.
That's incredible.
He goes back north, uses all that Byzantine gold to buy support, and becomes king of Norway.
King Harald III.
But he still isn't satisfied. He's an old man at this point.
Yeah.
But in 1066, he decides, you know what? I think I should be king of England too.
So he launches a massive invasion of England.
And he finally meets his end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, takes an arrow to the throat.
And that year, 1066, is incredibly significant.
Oh, hugely.
Historians widely consider Harald Hardrada's death and the events of 1066 because that's the same year William the Conqueror successfully took England as the definitive end of the Viking Age.
It's the closing of a chapter. But friends, just think about Harold's resume. It is insane.
Almost unbelievable.
It really is. It's like a guy serving in the U.S. Secret Service, then becoming president of a European country, and dying while trying to conquer a third nation.
While hauling a fortune he made in the Middle East.
Exactly. His life just perfectly encapsulates the staggering geographic scale of the Viking world.
Stretching from the Americas in the west, all the way to the walls of Constantinople and the markets of Baghdad in the east.
It just completely changes how you look at history. And friends, it really makes you reflect on how easily our view of history is shaped by who writes it.
It's the ultimate example of the victims writing the popular narrative.
Right, because Western Europe was victimized by the Vikings, because the monks in England and France were the ones getting their churches burned. We only remember the raiding.
We get a very one-sided view of them as just bloodthirsty pirates.
And we entirely forgot that in the East, they were politicians. They were global CEOs. They were imperial bodyguards.
They were playing a much larger geopolitical game.
And that leaves me with one final thought, which I really want you guys to mull over.
I have something that might blow their minds a little bit here.
Lay it on us.
So we've talked about how deeply these Norsemen integrated into the East, right?
Huh.
They founded the Kievan Rus, they integrated into Slavic royalty, they became the backbone of Byzantine militaries, they embedded themselves into Islamic trade routes.
Okay, yeah.
If they were that deeply woven into the fabric of those societies, how much of their cultural DNA, their language, their traditions, their literal bloodlines secretly shaped the modern demographics of Eastern Europe and the Middle East?
Wow.
Right. In ways we still don't fully recognize today, how much Viking blood is walking around in places we'd never expect.
Man, that is a lingering thought right there. How much of that DNA is just hidden in plain sight today. Friends, if you want us to do a full, dedicated deep dive purely on the insane life of Harald Hardrada, because we barely scratched the surface of his prison breaks and battles, let us know in the comments. And be sure to like